what's up guys? Gons here with another video for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. I had somebody named Tad email me with a link to a video called What If You Can Live for 10,000 Years? Q&A with Transhumanist Zoltan Istvan. Now, Zoltan wrote a book called The Transhumanist Wager. It's a novel. He was on A View from the Bunker with Derek Gilbert a few months ago talking about his agenda. He's been on Red Ice Radio. He's been out there, and actually I've had interaction with him as well, and he was kind enough to send me a copy of his book through email, and he seems like a really, really nice guy. And so, I'm not going after his character or anything like that. What I'm concerned about is just, of course, the theology and the philosophy that he is touting, which is transhumanist. I'm going to play this clip for you and then respond and then play another clip from the Prophecy Forum conference where Russ Dizdar addressed some of these issues. But Zoltan here just declared that for most transhumanists, what they ultimately want to seek is to conquer death. And the interviewer guy seems a little bit uneasy about this whole philosophy, but check out Zoltan's response. And then he asks another question. I'm going to play through a couple things here. So check this out real quick.
People get suspicious and maybe even a little creeped out when you are trying to take death out of the equation, because then you're starting to become something that is not quite human, and it's unsettling for some people. How do we get people to overcome that kind of innate revulsion and keep pushing forward when they first hear about these things?
To begin with, the very best way to do that is to try to change the kind of the paradigm that we sort of all believe in. America and many places around the world are quite religious, especially America. I was just writing an article, the poll said 83% still are declaring themselves Christian. And that makes it hard to want to take death out of the equation, because a natural part of the Christian ideology is to die and to eventually reach an afterlife with God. And transhumanists, it's not that they're anti-religious or they're only atheists, because they're not. They're all across the board. But overcoming death is not something that's associated in a kind of a religious framework. They simply associate it with wanting to just live indefinitely because they love life. And so I'm trying to, as a transhumanist, tell people the same thing. It's not that wanting to live indefinitely is something that is going to intrude or conflict with one's religion. It's just something that is the kind of evolving nature of the species. And if you can get people to think like that and not see it in conflict with their ideologies, then I think they're going to be more on board with saying, yeah, it's good to live 150, 200 years. And again, I'm not saying let's live forever. I don't think any transhumanists are saying that. I think what we want is the choice to be able to live indefinitely. That might be 10,000 years. That might only be 170 years.
Do you think most people want to live for thousands or tens of thousands of years?
Absolutely. I'm convinced that what has happened is we have been taught that we should die. We have been taught this taboo of living indefinitely or having too much power, because after all, except for the last few hundred years, we've been a species that's been subject to diseases and war and lots of terrible things. Once people think it through, and once people realize that this science and technology is actually here, and certainly will be here, I think, in 10, 20, 30 years, when they start stopping aging and reversing aging, they're going to start saying, wow, this is great. Yeah, I can have multiple careers. I can have more time with my family. I can watch my kids, grow to whatever they want to do.
So there you go. Those are some thoughts from Zoltan Istvan. I found it interesting that he said that, his whole concept, the transhumanist concept of conquering death, is not in a religious context. Because, ultimately when we're talking about conquering death, I think it always comes back to a religious context, because religion in general, the definition of religion is an organized system. Of course, the standard definition is, a belief in God or a group of gods. But aside from that, it's also an organized system of beliefs, ceremonies, and rules used in worship to worship God or gods. And the third definition here is an interest, a belief, or an activity that is very important to a person or group. And of course, if you look at that, then, the transhumanist agenda really falls into the third category really well. But I would argue that it also falls into the second category, the organized system of beliefs, ceremonies, and rules used to worship a god or a group of gods. And so what is the organized system of belief that, for the transhumanist? Well, it's to conquer death. It's to eliminate suffering. It's to, have the option to live however long you want to, have the option to change our bodies if it's not harming anybody, etc. The ceremonies involved, I would reckon that the technologies that the human body will merge with or be tinkering with genetically, literally with technology, stuff like that, I believe that that could be considered ceremonious to the transhumanist agenda. And then rules used to worship a god or a group of gods, well, that's a little bit different, because who are the god or the gods in transhumanism? Well, on one level, I think technology is the god, right? Because they basically worship technology and science. On another hand, the human being themselves are the gods, because we are taking evolution into our own hands. And so we are considered the gods or the god. But I would reckon that there is another element to this that I think should be considered. And Russ Dizdar alludes to this in this video. This is a short clip from the Prophecy Forum conference we had back in November. The DVDs will be ready to ship in about a week or two. I've been working on them for the last 2 months. It's been kind of a crazy time to do all that. And if you saw, I released my lecture called The Secret Weapons of Antichrist just yesterday, so check that out if you haven't. But here's a little clip from Russ's talk, Preparing for the Final Battle.
Charged sciences and technologies. I was in New York when Ray Kurzweil and the rest came. When Ray Kurzweil, the geneticists and the rest, I was telling you about transhumanism, a big thing. One thing we know about the transhumanists, the geneticists, the physicists, the scientists, the inventors worldwide, and Ray Kurzweil, the chief engineer at Google, right? They stood on stage, they hate death. They stood on stage, they promoted a concept of immortality. I don't have the entire presentation, but we do a 1-hour presentation. The elephants on the stage in New York. It's $1,000 a seat to sit there to listen to these guys. And on the first day and throughout the first day and the beginning of the next day, you listen to scientist after physicist, after geneticist, after inventor talk about transhumanism and neo-humanity. I met Dmitry Itskov, the billionaire Russian that backs it. We saw in the hallways and found out later the Russian cosmos were there that go back to Nikolai Fedorov and the teachings he plunged into Russia. You have no idea of the New Age cosmism, let alone the underground Satanism that is in Russia. Russia is in grave trouble, especially if Putin does what he seems he's leaning towards. Charged sciences. So I'm listening to scientists. I'm listening to people that have come from around the world. I met a guy, from Amsterdam over here, another guy from France over here. We're having discussions with all kinds of individuals, wanting the new technologies, wanting the newest of sciences to come to them. On the stage with Ray Kurzweil. The guys in red, Russian cosmists. They stood on the stage with a big screen like this to show the ascended masters, the old gods up in the sky, and they proclaimed to the crowd of tech seekers that the ancient gods want a return of the God-men, and they're going to help the scientists to acquire immortality. This is not science. This is charged science from the dark side, as dictated in the externalization of the hierarchy in a book that a demon guided Alice Bailey to write in 1930s.
So there you go. There is a connection between the demons and channelings and stuff that have happened, throughout the centuries. But, Russ talks about the externalization of the hierarchy written by Alice Bailey. Well, if you go to the 2045 Initiative website, it's very interesting because there is a tab for interfaith dialogue. And if you go there, it's fascinating to look at because there's a list of people who are in full support of transhumanism. And what you find is the Dalai Lama, who supports it. And then you have Hindu monks and yoga masters that support it. An Archbishop of Ottawa of the Orthodox Church in America, Lazar Puhalo, talks about it. So there is definitely a spiritual component to this. It's undeniable. So when Zoltan says, it's not religious, it's not in a religious context, I think there's a little bit of a misconception there. But, if you're a materialist, reductionist, and you think that this life is all there is, then obviously you are going to pursue this full steam ahead. And also the part that I think was interesting was the follow-up question regarding the repulsion, the natural repulsion that humans have with this idea of conquering death or becoming more than human or non-human. How do we overcome that? And Zoltan's response was that, as these technologies become available, people will adapt, basically. People will evolve. They will start to accept it. This is why I think it's so important for Christians to be talking about this, because as science and technology progresses forward, we're obviously going to have improvements in the quality of life and to lessen suffering, to help people that have different problems and stuff like that. Where do we draw the line? Because on one hand, yes, these technologies and sciences can help us. I mean, Christians already go to doctors and get surgery and take medicine and stuff like that, unless you're in the Amish. But then where do we draw the line? Where do we get to a point where we go, okay, you know what? This is crossing the line. Tom Horn, back when we had him on Canary Cry Radio, he suggested that when it interferes with the God-ordained system of kinds, humankind, animals, stuff like that, when you start breaching the kinds, this is when we are breaking God's command and the order in which God made his creation. So, I think the jury is still out on that. I think the ultimate goal here with the conquering death is sort of the rub here. And I say this every time when I talk about transhumanism, but gosh, it's the same thing, guys. Transhumanists out there. I saw David Pierce interacting with the last post and a few others, but conquering death, it's so fascinating because, the biblical prerogative is that we will conquer death. That's the whole point. I mean, the scriptures tell us that those who believe in Jesus will conquer death, and that we won't have the second death. We may have the first death, but if you don't allow supernaturalism in the picture, then obviously, the pursuit is understandable. But I would reckon that if Jesus Christ actually rose from the dead, and if you study the historical account of that, and you have the faith to believe that that actually happened, then what we're talking about is actually a supernatural technology, a supernatural physics that is God ordained. And of course, if that's the case, then yes, he can raise us from the dead to live eternal lives with our new bodies, as 1 Corinthians 15 talks about. So what do you guys think? Again, opinions are welcome. There's been a lot more dialogue recently with all the videos I've been posting. I appreciate your input, but again, be nice. God bless.